Around the World in 80 Days by Jules Verne. Chapter 30, in which Phileas Fogg simply does his duty. Three passengers, including Passepartout, had disappeared. Had they been killed in the fight? Were they taken prisoners by the Sioux? As it could not be told. The wounded were quite numerous, but none mortally. The one most seriously was Colonel Proctor, who had fought bravely, and who had been struck by a ball in the groin. He was carried to the station with the other passengers, whose conditions demanded immediate care. Mrs. Ouda was safe. Phileas Fogg, who had not spared himself, not a scratch. Fix was wounded in the arm, but was an unimportant wound. Passepartout was missing, and tears flowed from the young woman's eyes. Meanwhile, all passengers had left the train. The wheels of the cars were stained in blood. To the hubs and spokes hung ragged pieces of flesh. As far as the eye can reach, long red trails were seen on the white plain. The lost Indians were then disappearing south along the banks of the Republican River. Phileas Fogg, folded arms, stood motionless. He had a serious decision to make. Miss Auda, near him, looked without uttering a word. He understood her look. If his servant was prisoner, then he ought not to risk everything to rescue him from the Indians. I will find him dead or alive, he said simply to Miss Auda. Ah, Mr. Fogg? Mr. Fogg! Cried the young woman, seizing her companion's hands and covering them with tears. Alive, added Mr. Fogg, if we do not lose a minute. With this resolution, Phileas Fogg sacrificed himself entirely. He had just pronounced his ruin. A single day's delay would make him miss the steamer from New York, and his bet would be irrevocably lost. But in the face of the thought, it is my duty. He did not hesitate. The captain commanding Fourth Kearny was there. The soldiers, about 100 men, had put themselves on defensive in the event of the Sioux making a direct attack upon the station. Sir, said Phileas Fogg to the captain, 3 passengers have disappeared. Killed? Killed or prisoners? Replied Mr. Fogg, that it is an uncertainty which we must bring to an end. It is your intention to pursue the Sioux? It is a grave matter, sir, said the captain. These Indians may fly beyond Arkansas. I cannot abandon the fort entrusted to me, sir, replied Phileas Fogg. It is a question of life of 3 men, doubtless, but I can risk my life of 50 to save 3. I do not know whether you can, but you ought. Sir, replied the captain, and one here has the right to tell in what my duty is. Let it be so, replied Phileas Fogg coldly. I will go alone. You, sir, Fix, approached, go along in pursuit of the Indians. Do you wish me to allow to perish the unfortunate man whom every one of us had just that is, living owes his life? I shall go. Well, no, you shall not go alone, cried the captain, moved in spite of himself. No, you are a brave heart. 30 volunteers, he added, turning his soldier. The whole company advanced in a body. The captain had selected from these brave fellows. 30 soldiers were picked out. An old sergeant put at their head. Thanks, captain, said Mr. Fogg. You will permit me to accompany you? Fix said to the gentleman. You will do as you please, replied Phileas Fogg. But if you wish to do me service, then you remain by Mrs. Auda in case anything should happen to me. A sudden paleness overcast the detective's face. To separate himself from the man who he just followed step by step was so much persistent, to let him venture so much in the desert. Fix looked closely at this gentleman, and whatever he may thought, in spite of his prejudices, in spite of the inward struggle, he dropped his eyes before that quiet, frank look. I will remain, he said. A few moments after, Phileas Fogg pressed the young woman's hand, and having placed her in the care of his precious traveling bag, he set out with the sergeant and his little band. Before starting, he said to the soldiers, "My friends, there are $5,000 for you if you save the prisoners." And then it was a few minutes past noon. Mrs. Outer retired into a sitting room of the station, and there, alone, she waited, thinking of Phileas Fogg, his simple and grand generosity, his quiet courage. Mr. Fogg had sacrificed his fortune, and now he was staking his life, without hesitation, for a sense of duties without word. Phileas Fogg was a hero in her eyes. The detective, Fix, was not thinking thus. He could not restrain his agitation. He walked feverishly up and down the platform of the station. One moment vanquished, he became himself again. Fogg having gone, he comprehended his foolishness of letting him go. What had he consented to be separate from the man he had just been following around the whole world? His natural disposition got the upper hand, and he incriminated and accused himself. He treated himself as if he were the director of the Metropolitan Police, reproving an agent that a an agent caught a very green trick. I've been a very silly fellow, he thought. The other fellow would have told him who I was. He was gone, and he will not return. Where can I capture him now? And how have I, Fix, so allowed myself to be fascinated, where I have the warrant for my arrest in my pocket? I am decidedly only an ass. Thus reasoned the detective, while hours only slipped too slowly for his liking. He did not know what to do, sometimes felt like telling Mrs. Ouda everything, but he understood that how he would be received by the young woman. What course should he take? He was tempted to go in pursuit of Mr. Fogg of the immense white plains, but it did not seem impossible for him to find him. The footprints of the detachment were still imprinted on the snow, but with fresh covering, every track would soon be effaced. Fix was discouraged, and he felt an almost insurmountable desire to abandon the party. This very occasion of leaving the Kearney station and prosecuting the journey, so fruitful of mishaps, was open to him, and about 2 o'clock in the afternoon, while the snow was falling in large flakes, long whistles heard coming from the east. An enormous shadow, preceding by the lower light, slowly advanced, considerably increased by the mist, which gave it a fantastic appearance. But no train was expected from the east. The help asked from the telegraph could not arrive so soon, and the train from Omaha to San Francisco would not pass until the next day. They were soon enlightened. The locomotive, moving under a small head of steam, and whistling very loud, was one which, after being detached from the train, had continued its course with such frightful speed, in carrying the unconscious fireman and engineer. It had run on for several miles, and the fire had gone down for want of fuel. The steam had slackened, and an hour afterwards it was losing its speed by degrees. The engine finally stopped 20 miles before Kearney Station. Neither the engineer nor fireman was dead. After a very long swoon they revived. The engine had stopped, and when he saw himself in the desert, the locomotive without cars attached to it, the engineer understood what had happened. He could not guess how the locomotive had been detached from the train, and he did not doubt that the train left behind was in distress. The engineer did not hesitate as to what he ought to do, and to continue his course in the direction of Omaha was prudent. To return towards the train, in which the Indians were perhaps robbing, was dangerous. No matter. Coal, wood were thrown into the furnace, and the fire started up again. A head of steam increased again, and about 2 o'clock in the afternoon the engine was returned, running backwards to Kearney Station. This was the whistling they heard in the mist. It was a great satisfaction for the travelers when they saw the locomotive put at the head of the train, and they were going to be able to continue the journey so unfortunately interrupted. On the arrival of the engine, Mrs. Ouda came out of the station and addressing the young conductor, she asked, "You are going to start?" "This very instant, madame, but the prisoners, our unfortunate companions. I cannot interrupt our trip. We are already 3 hours behind time. Will the next train be coming from San Francisco?" "Tomorrow evening, madame." "Tomorrow evening, but it will be too late. We must wait." "Impossible," replied the conductor. "If you are going, get aboard the car." "I will not go," replied the young woman. Fix heard this conversation a few moments before, which every means of locomotion failed him. He decided to quit Kearney. Now the train was there, ready to continue. He had only had to seat himself in the car. The irresistible force fixed him to the ground. The platform at the station burned his feet. He could not tear himself away from it. The conflict with himself recommenced. His anger at the want of success choked him. He was going to struggle on to the end. Meanwhile, the passengers, with some of the wounded, among Connor Proctor, whose condition was very bad, had taken seats in the car. In the buzzing, the overheated boiler was heard. The steam escaped, and the valves. The engineer whistled. The train started and soon disappeared, mingling in white smoke and whirring of the snow. Detective Fix had remained. Some hours later, the weather was very bad. The cold was very keen. Fix, seated on a bench at the station, was motionless. It might have been supposed that he was sleeping, notwithstanding the storm. Mrs. Ouda left every moment the room which had been placed at her disposal. She went to the end of the platform, trying to look through the tempest of the snow, trying to pierce the mist which narrowed the horizon around her, listening if she could hear any sound, but there was nothing. She went in and chilled through, and returned to a few months later, always in vain. Evening came, and a little detachment had returned. What was it at this moment? Had they been able to overtake the Indians? Had there been a fight? Or were these soldiers lost in the mist? Wondering adventure captain at Fort Kearny was very uneasy, though he did not wish to let his uneasiness appear. Night came and snow fell less heavy, but the intensity of the cold increased. The most intrepid glance would not have been looked at this vast, obscure space without terror, or absolute silence prevailed over the plain. Neither the flight nor a bird nor passage of a wild beast disturbed the unbroken quiet. During the whole night, Mrs. Auda, in her mind, was full to dark presentiments. Her heart filled with anguish, wandered off to the border of the prairie. Her imagination carried her far off and showed her a thousand dangers. What she suffered during those long hours could not be expressed. Fixed, still immovable in the same spot, did not sleep. At a certain movement, a man approached and spoke to him, but the detective sent him away, after replying to him a negative sign. Thus the night passed, and at dawn, the half-concealed disk of the sun rose on the misty horizon. Still the eye might reach as far as 2 miles. Felix Fog and the detachment was gone to the south entirely deserted. It was 7 o'clock in the morning. The captain, extremely anxious, did not know what course to take. He ought to send a second detachment to help first, or he sacrificed the fresh men with so few chances of saving those who were sacrificed at first. But his hesitation did not last. With the Gester calling one of his lieutenant, he gave him order to throw out a reconnaissance to the south. When shots were heard, was it a signal? The soldiers rushed out of the fort, and half a mile they perceived a small band returning in good order. Phileas Fogg marched at the head. Near him, Passepartout and the two passengers, rescued from the hands of the Sioux. There was a fight 10 miles south of Fort Kearny. Passepartout and his two companions already struggling against their captors, and the Frenchman knocked down three of them with his fist. And when his master and soldiers rushed to their rescue, all the delivered were received with cries of joy. Phileas Fogg divided among the soldiers the rewards he had promised them, while Passepartout repeated to himself without reason, "I must confess that I am certainly costing my master very dearly." Fix, without uttering a word, looked at Mr. Fogg. It would have been difficult to analyze the impressions struggling within him. As for Mrs. Auda, she took the gentleman's hand and pressed it to hers without being able to utter a word. In the meantime, Passepartout, upon his arrival, was looking for the train at the station, and he thought he would find it there, nearly ready to start for Omaha, and they hoped they could still make it upon the time. "The train! The train!" he cried. "Gone," replied Fix. "And when will the next train pass?" asked Phileas Fogg. "Not until this evening." "Ah!" simply replied the impassible gentleman.